When I was 23, I moved into my first real apartment. It was the upstairs unit of an old Victorian house that had been split into a duplex. I had the top floor, my downstairs neighbor had the ground floor. The rent was cheap for the area, and I was so excited to have my own space that I ignored the drafty windows and the creaking floors. The landlord, a gruff man named Mr. Peterson, mentioned that the attic was a shared space, but that the access panel was in the back of my bedroom closet. He told me the downstairs tenant, a quiet guy in his 40s named Gary, never went up there and that I should just use it for storage. The first few months were completely normal. I worked a 9 to 5 data entry job, came home, made dinner, and watched TV. The house was old, so it made noises. Creaks, groans, the settling of old wood. I barely ever saw Gary. I'd hear his TV sometimes, a muffled murmur from below, or see his beat-up sedan in the driveway. He seemed perfectly harmless, just a private person. The strangeness began in November when the weather turned cold. It started with sounds. Not the usual house-settling groans, but something different. It was a faint shuffling, almost a dragging sound coming from directly above my bedroom. At first, I blamed squirrels. It was an old house after all. I'd hear it around 2 or 3 in the morning, a soft skitter drag. Then silence. It was just loud enough to wake me up, and just quiet enough to make me question if I'd dreamed it. I mentioned it to Mr. Peterson, who grumbled about pests and promised to put out traps. But the traps did nothing. The sound continued and it began to change. It started to sound heavier, less like a squirrel and more like a bag. A heavy canvas bag being dragged inch by inch across the attic floorboards. One night, I woke up freezing. The sound was back, but it was louder. Drag, pause, drag. It seemed to be moving from the far end of the house directly over my neighbor Gary's apartment and slowly making its way across the center line until it was right over my head. I lay perfectly still, my heart hammering against my ribs. The dragging stopped and I heard a new sound, a soft creak, then another. It was the sound of a floorboard taking weight. Someone was walking up there. I shot out of bed, flicked on the light, and stared at the ceiling. The sound stopped instantly. Complete silence. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next day, I was exhausted and paranoid. I decided to check the attic access panel in my closet. I had to push a bunch of coats aside to get to it. It was a simple square of plywood, painted the same color as the ceiling. I hadn't touched it since I moved in. I stood on a chair, pushed my fingers against the edge, and it didn't budge. It seemed to be sealed shut. I felt a wave of relief. Maybe it was just the pipes or the wind. That night, I woke up at 3:15 a.m. Not to a sound, but to a feeling. The air in my room felt wrong, heavy. I opened my eyes and stared into the darkness, and I heard it. A sound so quiet I almost missed it. Click. It was the sound of a camera shutter. I bolted upright, scrambling for the lamp. As my fingers fumbled for the switch, I heard a thud from the closet, followed by a frantic, heavy scraping sound moving away, back towards the other side of the house. I turned on the light, my hands shaking so badly I could barely stand. I ran to the closet, threw the clothes off the rack. The attic panel was open. Just a crack, maybe half an inch. A sliver of perfect, terrifying blackness. I screamed and ran out of my apartment, drove to a 24-hour diner, and sat there until the sun came up, shaking and crying into a cup of coffee. I called Mr. Peterson and left a hysterical voicemail that someone was in the attic. He called me back a few hours later, sounding annoyed. He said he'd gone over with the police, that Gary had let them in and they'd checked the whole place. The attic was empty. Just squirrels, like I said, he barked. You probably just spooked yourself, kid. I felt insane. Did I leave the panel open? Did I imagine the click? I went back to the apartment, my dread so thick it was hard to breathe. I bought a heavy-duty slide bolt and a padlock from the hardware store. I stood on the chair in the closet, my heart pounding, and installed it on the attic panel. I locked it. I felt safer, but still crazy. For a week, there was nothing. The silence was almost as bad as the noise. I started to believe I had imagined it. Then came the night of the storm. The wind was howling, rattling the old windows. Around midnight, I heard a crash from the living room. I ran out and my blood turned to ice. A framed picture had fallen off the wall. But that wasn't the problem. The problem was why it fell. Standing in the middle of my living room, covered in drywall dust and insulation, was Gary. He had just dropped down from a new hole he had cut in the ceiling. He was holding a camera with a long telephoto lens. He just stood there staring at me. His eyes were wide and blank. He wasn't the quiet, shuffling man I'd seen in the driveway. He was breathing hard, his face pale with a light sheen of sweat. But you shouldn't have locked the door, he whispered. His voice was raspy. I just like to watch. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I just grabbed the heavy glass paperweight off my desk and threw it as hard as I could. It hit him in the chest and he grunted, stumbling back. That was all the time I needed. I sprinted for the front door, unlocked it, and ran out into the freezing rain, screaming fire at the top of my lungs. The neighbors called the police. When they arrived, Gary was gone. He had fled out the back. But this time they didn't need my word for it. There was a gaping hole in my living room ceiling. They went into his apartment and what they found was a nightmare. His apartment was mostly empty, but the access panel on his side was wide open. When they went up into the attic, they found his real home. He had been living up there for months, maybe years. They found a nest built directly over my bedroom. A dirty mattress, piles of blankets, dozens of water bottles, and plastic bags filled with human waste. They found stacks of videotapes and photo albums. Photos of me, sleeping, getting dressed, watching TV, all taken from a series of small, almost invisible holes he had drilled in the ceiling, all over my apartment. The click I heard wasn't a camera. It was the sound of his drill. Gary was caught 3 states over a month later. It turned out he had a long history of stalking and breaking and entering. The attic wasn't a shared space. It was his hunting blind. I moved out that week. I live in a modern concrete high-rise building now. Top floor. No attics. But I still have this visceral, physical reaction to old houses. And sometimes when I'm just about to fall asleep, I'll hear a faint creak in the ceiling and my eyes will snap open. And I won't be able to sleep for the rest of the night. I grew up in a quiet, idyllic suburb in the late 90s. It was the kind of place where kids rode bikes until the streetlights came on and everyone knew each other's names. Our next-door neighbor was a man named Mr. Harris. He was a widower in his late 60s, a retired chemistry teacher, and he was, by all accounts, the perfect neighbor. He was quiet, polite, and his garden was the envy of the entire street. His backyard was his kingdom. He spent all day out there, tending to his roses, pruning his hedges, and most famously, growing his tomatoes. His tomatoes were legendary. They were massive, perfectly red, and tasted sweeter than any tomato I've ever had since. My mom was always trading him cookies for a basket of them. I was 8 years old, and I often played in my backyard, which was separated from his by a simple 6-foot wooden fence. I'd sometimes see him over the fence, wearing his wide-brimmed straw hat and gardening gloves, humming to himself. He'd always wave, ask me how school was, and go back to his work. My only off feeling about him was his shed. It was a large, windowless tin shed at the very back of his property, pushed up against the woods that bordered our neighborhood. It was old, painted a faded red, and secured with a comically large, rusty padlock. He was meticulous about his yard, but the shed looked like it was rotting. We were never, ever allowed near it. The summer I turned 9, our town was hit by a terrible drought. The lawns turned brown and watering restrictions were put in place. Everyone's garden withered. Everyone's except for Mr. Harris's. His roses were brighter, his grass was greener, and his tomato plants were overflowing with fruit. It was unnatural. My mom joked that he must have made a deal with the devil. But something else changed too. The smell. Mr. Harris's yard always smelled like roses and fresh-cut grass. Now, a new smell started to drift over the fence. It was a heavy, coppery smell, like old pennies or bad meat left in the sun. It was thick and metallic and it made my nose wrinkle. My dad complained, thinking a possum had died under his deck, but he never found anything. The smell, however, seemed to be coming right from Mr. Harris's prize-winning tomato patch. One hot July afternoon, I was playing catch with myself, throwing a tennis ball against the side of my house. I threw it too hard and it sailed over the fence, landing somewhere in Mr. Harris's yard. I ran to the fence, my heart sinking. It was my last good tennis ball. I looked for Mr. Harris, but his car was gone. I figured it was safe to hop the fence, grab the ball, and hop back. It would take 10 seconds. I pulled our rusty garbage can to the fence, climbed up, and dropped quietly onto his perfect plush grass. I immediately spotted my ball. It had rolled right up to the edge of his famous tomato patch. As I bent to grab it, the smell hit me. It was so much stronger here. That coppery, iron-like stench was overwhelming. It was coming from the soil. The soil around the tomato plants was dark, almost black, and looked wet, even though the ground everywhere else was bone-dry. I looked closer. Mixed into the dirt, I could see things. Small, whitish fragments. I thought they were seashells, but that made no sense. And there was a dark, reddish-brown stain on the mulch at the base of the biggest plant. I grabbed my ball, feeling sick. As I turned to leave, my eyes fixed on the shed. The big, rusty padlock was gone. The door was slightly ajar. I know I shouldn't have. Every instinct told me to run. But I was 9. I was curious. I crept across the yard, the grass silent under my sneakers, and pushed the creaking tin door. The smell that hit me was the same as the garden, but 1,000 times stronger. It was the smell of a slaughterhouse. My eyes took a moment to adjust to the dark. The shed wasn't full of rakes and shovels. It was a laboratory. Beakers and tubes lined a long table. But the main space was dominated by 3 massive blue plastic barrels. And on the dirt floor, a dark, sticky puddle was spreading from the base of one of them. In the middle of the puddle was a tooth. A large, yellowish-white tooth. Not from an animal. It looked human. I heard the sound of a car engine. Mr. Harris was home. I panicked. I spun around, but as I did, my elbow hit the table. A glass beaker wobbled and fell to the floor with a smash. I heard the car door slam. "Who's in there?" His voice wasn't the kind old man voice I knew. It was sharp and cold. I bolted from the shed. I ran for the fence, my feet slipping on the grass. I could hear him behind me, not shouting, just running. I scrambled for the garbage can on my side, trying to get a foothold on the fence. I felt a hand grab my ankle. His grip was like iron. "What did you see, boy?" he hissed, his face purple with rage. I kicked, screaming, and my sneaker connected with his nose. I heard a wet crack. He howled and let go. I fell over the fence, landing hard on my back in my own yard. I scrambled to my feet and ran inside, locking the deadbolt, screaming for my mom. My parents, seeing me hysterical and covered in dirt, finally believed something was wrong. My dad went outside and saw Mr. Harris calmly spraying his walkway with a hose, a wad of bloody tissues held to his nose. When my dad confronted him, Mr. Harris just smiled and said I'd been trespassing and had fallen. But my dad had smelled it too. He called the police. When the police opened that shed and those barrels, they found what was left of Mr. Harris's wife, the one who had left him 5 years prior, and 2 other people, transients who were never even reported missing. He was a retired chemistry teacher. He had been using specific chemical compounds to dissolve them, and then using the slurry, as the news called it, to fertilize his garden. The bone fragments, the tooth, the coppery, iron-rich smell. Our entire neighborhood had been eating those tomatoes all summer, praising him for them. Mr. Harris is gone, obviously. The house was torn down. It's just an empty lot now. But I'm 35 years old and I haven't eaten a fresh tomato since. And I'll never, ever trust a perfect garden. A few years ago, I was living in a cheap 6-story apartment building in the city. The place was a classic pre-war building, which was a nice way of saying the plumbing was loud and the walls were paper thin. I was on the 4th floor in 4A. I could hear my neighbor in 4B, an older woman, watching her game shows. I could hear the couple in 4C arguing. I could hear everything. It was annoying, but it was part of the deal for cheap rent. My bedroom wall was shared with apartment 4B. That's where Mrs. Petrov lived, the game show lady. The wall my couch was against, however, was shared with 3B, the apartment directly below 4B. The layout was weird. I never saw the tenant from 3B, ever. In the 6 months I'd been there, the door was always shut, no mail piled up, no noise. Until one Tuesday. I was sitting on my couch, reading. It was quiet, maybe 10 p.m. Mrs. Petrov was asleep. The couple in 4C was, for once, not fighting. Then I heard it. A faint tap. It was coming from the wall I was leaning against. From 3B. I ignored it. It was probably just hammering or pipes. But it was rhythmic. Asterisk tap, tap, tap. Pause, tap, tap, tap. Asterisk, it was steady. It went on for about 10 minutes, then stopped. The next night it was back. Same time, 10 p.m. Asterisk tap, tap, tap. Pause, tap, tap, tap. Asterisk, this time it was annoying. I was trying to watch a movie. I balled up my fist and, mostly as a joke, I knocked back. Asterisk thump, thump, thump. The tapping on the other side stopped. Instantly, I felt a small prickle of unease. I hadn't expected a reaction. I put my ear to the wall. I heard nothing, just dead air. I shrugged it off and went to bed. 2 nights later, I was in my kitchen when I heard it again. But the pattern was different. It wasn't the steady tap, tap, tap. It was faster, more urgent. Asterisk tap, 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 tap. I froze. I don't know why, but it sounded desperate. I went to the wall and put my ear against the plaster. It was cold. I waited. Tap, 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 tap. Asterisk. I knocked back. Thump. Just one. There was a pause. Then the response. Asterisk tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. Asterisk. My blood ran cold. This wasn't pipes. This was communication. I don't know Morse code, but I know a pattern when I hear one. I knocked back. Thump, thump. The response. Asterisk tap, tap. Tap, tap. Asterisk. We were talking. I had no idea what we were saying. I was just matching the number of knocks. This went on for 5 minutes. It was the strangest, most unsettling conversation I'd ever had. Then I heard a different sound muffled from 3B's side. It was a man's voice shouting. Angry. I couldn't make out the words. It was followed by a crash. The tapping on my wall became frantic. Tap, 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 tap. It was just a flurry of desperate, terrified banging. Then a muffled scream. And then silence. I stood there, my heart in my throat, for a full minute. The silence was worse than the knocking. I ran to my laptop and Googled tapping code. The first thing that came up was asterisk tap tap tap. Pause, top top top. Pause, tap tap tap. Asterisk 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. I thought back. The tap 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 I heard at first, was that short? The top, was that the pause? My God, was the first pattern SOS? I grabbed my phone and called 911. I felt like an idiot. My neighbor. I think my neighbor is knocking for help, I stammered. The dispatcher was skeptical. Are they yelling? Is there a fight? No, I said, they're tapping on the wall. I think it's Morse code. I heard a scream. To my shock, they sent a car. 10 minutes later, I heard heavy boots in the hallway. I looked through my peephole. 2 officers were standing in front of 3B's door. They knocked. Police, is everyone all right in there? No answer. They knocked again louder. Police, open the door. I heard a faint shuffling from inside 3B. The officers looked at each other. One of them tried the handle. It was locked. They announced they were going to force entry. The second the officer's shoulder hit the door, I heard it. A man roaring inside. A crash. The sound of a woman screaming, a high, thin wail. The officers burst in. I heard, show me your hands. Get on the ground. Get on the ground. I stayed glued to my peephole, terrified. After what felt like an eternity, the officers came back out, cuffing a large, bearded man I had never seen before. He was fighting them, spitting and cursing. Then 2 paramedics rushed in with a gurney. When they came out, a woman was on it. She was pale and looked horribly malnourished, her hair matted. She saw me watching through my peephole. Our eyes met for just a second. She was crying, but she nodded. Just a small, weak nod. It turned out the apartment wasn't rented to the man. It was rented to her. He was her ex-boyfriend, and he had been holding her prisoner in her own apartment for over a month. He had a restraining order, and when he violated it, he decided he'd rather keep her than let her go. He'd kept her bound in the back bedroom, letting her out only to eat. The wall she was tapping on was the only one that touched another apartment. Mine. The first rhythm I heard, tap, 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 wasn't SOS. I looked it up later. It was HEY. She was just trying to see if anyone was there. The pattern I interrupted was her attempt at HELP. My knocking back had confirmed someone was listening. It also alerted him. When he heard her tapping, he came in. The final, frantic flurry was her last, desperate attempt before he tried to silence her. The police told me my call saved her life. He was, in their words, at the end of his rope. I moved out 6 months later. I couldn't stand the silence. Every time the building was quiet, I'd find myself putting my ear to the wall, just listening. After I graduated from nursing school, I was deep in debt and desperate for a job. I found a posting on a medical board for a live-in companion and caretaker for an elderly gentleman. The pay was astronomical. The catch: the estate was in a rural, extremely isolated part of coastal Maine. The posting specified no pets, no frequent visitors. I was young and adventurous, so I applied. I got the job. The estate was called Greywood. It was a massive, Gothic-looking stone house perched on a cliff overlooking the ocean. The nearest town was 45 minutes away. My patient was a man in his 80s named Mr. Alistair Finch. He was frail, used a wheelchair, and was mostly lucid, but had fits of paranoia. My job was to manage his medication, cook his meals, and, well, just be there. My living quarters were in a separate, guest cottage, about 100 yards from the main house. It was cozy and modern, and it gave me a sense of privacy. The only other person on the property was the groundskeeper, a man named Silas. Silas lived in another small cottage on the other side of the property, near the main gate. He was a tall, gaunt man in his 50s who never spoke. Not spoke little. He never spoke. Mr. Finch had told me Silas was a simpleton who had worked for his family for decades. He just nodded or grunted. He was harmless, if deeply unsettling. My first few weeks were peaceful. I'd spend my days with Mr. Finch, reading to him, listening to his long, rambling stories about his family's shipping empire. At 8 p.m., I'd give him his sleeping medication and he'd be out for the night. I'd walk back to my cottage, lock the door, and have the night to myself. The strangeness started with Mr. Finch's collections. The house was filled with them. Ship models, old maps, taxidermy. One room, however, was kept locked. Mr. Finch told me it was his most precious collection and that no one, not even me, was to enter. One of my duties was to tidy up. One afternoon, I was dusting Mr. Finch's massive roll-top desk. I accidentally knocked over a heavy ledger, and a small brass key fell out of a hidden compartment. I knew instantly it was the key to the locked room. Mr. Finch was napping. Silas was out on the grounds. I couldn't resist. I picked up the key, my hand trembling, and went to the forbidden room. The key fit. I turned it, opened the heavy oak door, and stepped inside. It wasn't maps. It wasn't models. The room was a dollhouse. It was filled wall to wall with hundreds of antique porcelain dolls. They were sitting on shelves, on tiny chairs, in glass cabinets. Their dead, glass eyes all seemed to stare right at me. It was creepy but harmless. I walked deeper into the room. At the far end, on a velvet pedestal, was the prize of the collection. A set of 3 dolls about 2 feet tall, dressed in beautiful handmade Victorian clothing. A man, a woman, and a little girl. They were hyper-realistic. Their skin had a waxy, soft texture. Their hair wasn't spun synthetic. It looked real. I leaned in close to look at the little girl doll. Her fingernails were dirty, and they were cracked. I felt a cold dread wash over me. I looked at the doll's skin. It wasn't porcelain. It was something else. I touched its cheek. It was smooth but pliable, leathery. I heard a floorboard creak in the hallway. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. Silas was standing in the doorway, just watching me. His face was completely blank. He didn't move. He just stared. I was just dusting, I stammered. He stepped into the room. He walked right past me over to the 3 dolls. He reached out a long, bony finger and gently stroked the little girl doll's hair. He then looked at me. He raised his finger to his lips. Then he just walked out, leaving the door open. I ran back to my cottage, locked the door, and had a full-blown panic attack. I didn't know what I had seen. Taxidermy? It was grotesque. I decided I was quitting. I'd wait until morning, call a cab, and just leave. That night, a storm rolled in off the ocean. The power went out. My cottage was pitch black, save for my phone's flashlight. I was packing my bags when I heard a heavy thud on my porch. I crept to the window and looked out. Silas was standing on my lawn in the pouring rain, staring at my cottage. He was holding his head shears. He took one step, then another, toward my door. I ran to the back door, but he was already there, as if he'd known. I saw his face pressed against the glass. He wasn't blank anymore. He was smiling. I screamed and ran into the bathroom, locking the door. I called 911, but my signal was non-existent. No service. The storm. I heard him at the front door. He wasn't knocking. He was hacking. The thwack, thwack of the shears hitting the wood. He was breaking in. I was trapped. I looked around the bathroom, desperate. There was a small, frosted glass window. I wrapped my hand in a towel, smashed it, and crawled out, cutting my arms on the glass. I fell into the mud and ran. I didn't run for the gate. I ran for the main house. I ran for Mr. Finch. I sprinted through the storm, burst into the main house. The door was unlocked, and ran up to Mr. Finch's room. Mr. Finch, Mr. Finch, Silas, he's gone crazy. He's trying to kill me. I flicked on my phone light. Mr. Finch was in his bed. He wasn't moving. I rushed over. His eyes were wide open, staring at the ceiling. A bottle of his medication was empty on the nightstand. He was cold. He'd been dead for hours. I realized the truth in a wave of icy terror. Mr. Finch wasn't the one who posted the ad. He wasn't the one who hired me. He does get so paranoid. I spun around. Silas was standing in the bedroom doorway, dripping wet, the shears in his hand. He didn't like the new ones, Silas said. His voice was a dry and used rasp. He said I made them wrong, but I liked them. What did you do? I whispered, backing away. Mr. Finch has been gone for a long time, Silas rasped, stepping into the room. But he likes his collections. He needs his collections. He needed a nurse. He smiled. The last one. She's the prettiest. The one in the blue dress. The woman doll. It wasn't a doll. It was taxidermy. He was a collector too. And he had just hired me to be his new caretaker. And his next acquisition. He lunged. I threw the heavy bedside lamp at him and ran. I ran down the main staircase, out the front door, and into the woods. I just ran for miles in the dark and the rain, the sound of the shears snicking behind me. I eventually hit the main road. A truck found me at 4 a.m., shivering, bloody, and hysterical. When the police got to Greywood, Silas was gone. The cottage was hacked to pieces. Mr. Finch had been dead for at least a day, a massive overdose of his own medication. And the collection room? It was empty. All the dolls, all of them, were gone. They never found Silas. But the police did identify the dolls. The last 3 caretakers, all women who had taken the same high-paying job, were all listed as missing persons. I was supposed to be the 4th. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't gone into that room. If I had just locked my door and waited for the storm to pass. After a messy divorce, I wanted to get as far away from the city as possible. I drained my 401k and bought a small off-grid cabin on 20 acres of land in rural Montana. It was my dream, total isolation. The nearest paved road was 5 miles away. My only neighbor was a man who lived in a similar but much more run-down cabin on the opposite hill, about a mile across the deep, wooded valley that separated us. I never met him. I'd just see a wisp of smoke from his chimney on cold mornings, or sometimes a single dim light in his window at night. It was a comforting sign that I wasn't completely alone in the wilderness. I spent the first few weeks settling in, chopping wood, and getting my solar panels and generator working. I'd sit on my porch in the evenings, drinking a beer and just enjoying the silence. I'd look across the valley at the other cabin. It was just a dark shape against the sunset. The first off thing happened about a month in. I was using my binoculars to do some bird watching. My gaze drifted across the valley to the other cabin. I focused the lens. The cabin was dilapidated, with tarps on the roof, and standing on the porch was a man. He was stock still, and he was holding binoculars aimed directly at my cabin. I dropped my own binoculars, my heart pounding. It was just so unnerving. It felt like I'd been caught spying, even though he was doing the exact same thing. I went inside feeling a weird hot shame. The next morning, I went out to my woodpile. Sitting on top of a freshly split log was a small carved bird. It was crudely made, whittled from a piece of pine, but the detail was intricate. It was beautiful. I had no idea where it came from. My cabin was a 5-mile hike from any road. The only person within walking distance was the man on the hill. Had he walked all the way down his hill, across the valley and up my hill, just to leave this? It was a 2-mile hike, easy through dense woods. I took the bird inside, confused. Was it a welcome gift? A week later, another gift appeared. This time it was on my porch railing. It was a dream catcher, but it wasn't made of sinew and feathers. It was made of barbed wire and strands of what looked like animal fur. And in the center, woven into the wire, was a small, polished deer bone. The welcome feeling was gone. This felt like a warning. I started to feel watched. I'd be walking the perimeter of my property, and I'd hear a stick snap in the woods, but see nothing. I'd be reading on my porch, and the hair on the back of my neck would stand up. I'd look up at his hill and I couldn't see him, but I knew he was there. I started keeping my curtains closed. The final straw happened in early December. The first big snow was coming. I was reinforcing the plastic on my windows when I saw him. He wasn't on his hill. He was on my side of the valley. He was standing at the edge of my tree line, maybe 200 yards from my cabin. Just standing there, watching me. He was wearing a big flannel jacket and holding a rifle. I froze. I slowly raised my hand and waved. He didn't wave back. He just raised his rifle, sighted it, not at me but at the tree just above my head. Crack. The gunshot echoed across the valley. A chunk of bark exploded from the tree, showering me in splinters. I yelped and fell backward onto the porch. He hadn't tried to hit me. He was showing me he could. I scrambled inside, locked the deadbolt, and grabbed my own rifle. I spent the next hour peeking through the curtains, my hands shaking, but he was gone. The snow started that night. It was a blizzard. By morning I was snowed in. 3 feet easy. The power was out and I had to run the generator just to keep the heat on. The isolation I had craved was now my worst enemy. I spent the day in a state of high alert. Around 4 p.m., as the light was already fading, I looked out the window, and my blood turned to ice. There was a track of footprints. Deep, heavy boot prints coming from the woods and leading right up to my porch. He was here, or he had been here. I grabbed my rifle. I checked the porch. Empty. I checked the back. Empty. But sitting on the porch railing right where the dream catcher had been was a single dead rabbit. It was fresh. Its throat had been cut. I was pacing my cabin, frantic, when I heard the thud on the roof. I stopped breathing. The generator was chugging away outside, but I heard it again. A heavy step on my roof. He had climbed up. Scrape, scrape, scrape. He was walking on the metal roof. He was walking towards the chimney. I stared at my fireplace. It was my only source of heat. I had a small fire going. The flue was open. A handful of something pattered down the chimney, hissing as it hit the embers. It was snow. He was looking down. I was trapped. I was in a box and he was on top of it. I backed into the corner of the cabin, my rifle aimed at the fireplace. What was he doing? Then I heard it. A new sound. A heavy metallic clang. He was putting something over the chimney. A piece of sheet metal. He was blocking it. Within seconds, the cabin started to fill with smoke. The generator was too loud for him to hear me, and the snow was too deep for me to run. He wasn't going to shoot me. He wasn't going to break in. He was going to smoke me out, like a bee from a hive, into the blizzard, into the dark, where he was waiting. The smoke was getting thick. I was coughing, my eyes watering. It was either suffocate or run. I made a choice. I aimed my rifle at the ceiling right next to the fireplace and fired. Boom. The cabin filled with more smoke, but this time of gunpowder. I fired again and again. I emptied the magazine into the ceiling, just roaring. I heard a heavy thump as he fell or jumped off the roof into the snowdrift below. I ran to the window. I saw him. He was limping. I had hit him. He was stumbling, bleeding, trying to get back to the woods. He looked back at my window and his face, it wasn't human. It was pure primal rage. He disappeared into the trees. I spent the next 48 hours in that smoke-filled cabin, my rifle in my lap, waiting for the snowplow. I didn't sleep. I just waited. When the plow finally cleared the road, I was in my truck and gone within 10 minutes. I drove to the sheriff's office in town. They went out there, but the blizzard had covered his tracks. They went to his cabin. It was empty. It looked like it had been abandoned for years, except for one thing. In the middle of the empty, dust-covered floor was a small, freshly carved wooden bird. I never went back. I sold the cabin at a massive loss. I live in a condo in the suburbs now. I hate it, but the one thing I love is that I can see my neighbors. I can see their cars. I can see them get their mail. And I know for damn sure they aren't on a hill watching me through the dark. When I landed a new job in Chicago, I had to find an apartment fast. I ended up in a slightly rundown but charming 3-story brownstone. I took the second-floor apartment. The building was old and the soundproofing was terrible. My upstairs neighbors were a young couple who argued constantly. My downstairs neighbor in 1A was a man I never saw. The only reason I knew he existed was the mail. Mr. M. Vasek. His mailbox was always overflowing. The super, a guy named Stan, told me the man in 1A was a recluse. He said the guy was an old, disabled veteran who paid his rent in cash, slid under the office door on the first of the month, and had everything delivered. In the 2 years Stan had worked there, he'd never once laid eyes on him. My bedroom was directly above his. And from the first night, I knew my neighbor was odd. Hummed. It wasn't a normal, cheerful hum. It was a single, low-frequency, monotone note. It would start every night at around 1 a.m. and go for hours. It was just on the edge of hearing, so low that I felt it in my chest more than I heard it. It vibrated up through the floorboards. I tried earplugs. I tried a white noise machine. Nothing could drown out that thrum. After a week of sleepless nights, I went downstairs. I knocked on 1A's door. The peephole was dark. Hello? Mr. Vasek? This is your upstairs neighbor. I was just wondering if you could stop humming? I felt ridiculous. The humming stopped. I waited. Nothing. No footsteps, no voice. I went back upstairs and the apartment was silent. At 1 a.m. on the dot, it started again. But this time it was angrier, louder. It was like he was doing it intentionally to spite me. This began our war. The next day, I started stomping on my floor. Just thump, thump, thump right over where I thought his bed was. The humming stopped. Then from below, a bang. A single, violent bang on his ceiling, my floor. It was so hard it shook my nightstand. I stopped stomping. A week passed. No humming. I had one, I thought. But a new activity started. The smell. A sweet chemical smell. Like formaldehyde. And something else. Something rotten, masked by the chemicals. It would waft up through the floorboards at all hours. I complained to Stan, who said he'd talked to him, but the smell only got worse. Then came the drilling. One Saturday, I was woken at 3 a.m. by the sound of a power drill. BZZZZZZZZ. BZ. Asterisk, it was coming from directly beneath my bed. Not next to it, directly under it. He was drilling into his ceiling, into my floor. I jumped out of bed, grabbed a flashlight, and looked under the bed. The old hardwood floor was untouched, but the sound was right there. Asterisk BZZZZZZZ. Asterisk. I pounded on the floor. Hey, what are you doing? Stop it. The drilling stopped. I heard a muffled giggle. It wasn't a happy sound. It was a wet, throaty, choking sound. I called the police. I told them my neighbor was destroying the property, drilling through the floor. 2 officers showed up. They pounded on 1A. No answer. They got Stan to open the door. I followed them down. Sir, you need to stay in the hall. Stan unlocked the door and the smell, my God. It hit us like a physical wall. That sweet, rotten, chemical smell. The cops recoiled. They went in, flashlights out. The apartment was a horde. Piles of newspapers, garbage, junk stacked to the ceiling. It was a maze. Mr. Vasic? Chicago PD, they shouted. They navigated the maze of trash. I was peeking in from the doorway. One of the officers called out from the back. I think I found him. I heard the other cop curse. Oh God, get EMS. And a coroner. Mr. Vasic was in his bed. He had been dead for a very, very long time. Weeks, maybe months. The coroner later said it was at least 6 weeks. I was confused. I had been hearing him. I'd interacted with him. This guy's been dead a while, the first cop said, coming back out. But look at this. He pointed his flashlight at the ceiling in the bedroom. Mr. Vasic's bedroom. My floor. It was covered in small drilled holes. Hundreds of them. And in the corner was a hole. Not a small one. A large, jagged hole about 2 feet wide. It went up. That's your apartment, right? The cop asked. My closet, I whispered. We ran upstairs. We ran to my bedroom closet. In the back, under a pile of shoes I hadn't touched in months, the floorboards had been eaten away from below, creating a crawl space. The humming, the drilling, the giggling. It wasn't Mr. Vasic. Mr. Vasic had been dead for 6 weeks, but his rent had been paid. On the 1st of the month, in cash, slid under Stan's door. Something had been living in that apartment with the body for weeks. In the horde, someone who knew the building, someone who knew how to move between the walls. The cops searched the whole building. They brought in dogs. They found nothing. Whoever it was, they were gone. They'd used the hole in my closet to get into my apartment when I was at work. They'd used my shower. I found food wrappers under my couch that weren't mine. But the police, they found why he was drilling. He wasn't drilling up. He was drilling down from my floor. He had been in my apartment, in my closet. He would wait until I was asleep, and he would crawl out. And he would drill small, tiny peepholes in the floor right next to my bed. The humming, the giggling, it wasn't coming from below me. It was coming from under my bed, from the crawl space he had built. I never slept in that apartment again. I broke my lease and moved in with my parents. The police never found the man. They didn't know who he was, but they had a theory. They found tools in the crawl space and a set of building maintenance keys. Stan, the super, had disappeared the same day the police were called. He'd cleared out his office, just gone. He was the only other person with keys. He knew the building's layout. He knew the crawl spaces. He knew Vasic was a recluse. He knew I was a single guy living alone. I don't know what's worse, the idea of a stranger living in your floor, or the idea of the man you trusted with your keys standing in your closet just waiting for you to fall asleep. I live in one of those master-planned suburban communities. Cookie-cutter houses, pristine lawns, overly friendly neighborhood watch. My house is on a cul-de-sac. For about a year, the house directly across from me was empty. It was a blessing. Total privacy. Then the new neighbors moved in. It was odd. There was no moving truck. One day, a rusty, beat-up, mid-90s red minivan just appeared in their driveway, and it never moved again. I never saw anyone come or go. No one brought in groceries. No one got the mail. The lawn started to get overgrown, but the lights would be on. A single dim yellow light in an upstairs window. Every night, I was curious. I'm a work-from-home mom, so I'm always looking out my window. I'd watch that house, waiting for a sign of life. After about a week, I saw a hand, a child's hand. It pressed against the inside of the minivan's fogged-up, dirty side window. Just a small palm print. Then it was gone. My blood ran cold. Was someone living in that van? In the driveway? I called the non-emergency police line. I reported an abandoned vehicle and squatters. An officer came out. He ran the plates. He knocked on the door. A man answered. I watched from my window. The man was nondescript. 40s, jeans, a faded green t-shirt. He looked normal. He and the officer talked. They laughed. The man pointed at the van. The officer nodded, wrote something on a pad, and then left. The man stood on his porch and looked directly at my window. He knew I was the one who called. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He just stared for a full minute. Then he went back inside. That night, the red minivan was gone. I felt a wave of relief. Maybe they were just a weird, private family and I was the paranoid, nosy neighbor. But a week later, the van was back. It wasn't in the driveway. It was parked on the street, down the block, and it was facing my house. I tried to ignore it, but it moved. I'd wake up and it would be parked 2 streets over, but still in a position where it had a clear view of my house. The next day, it would be at the other end of the cul-de-sac, and the handprints were back, not just on the van. One morning, I went to get my newspaper, and there, on the driver's side window of my car, was a single, small, greasy handprint. I was terrified. I called the police again. They said it wasn't illegal to park on a public street. They said it was probably just kids playing. But I knew it wasn't. This is when my son Leo, who was 5, started having nightmares. He said a shadow man was watching him through his window. His bedroom window faced the street, faced wherever the van was parked. I was in the kitchen washing dishes. It was dusk. I was watching Leo play in the front yard. The red minivan was parked across the street. I was just staring at it, waiting it. The side door of the van slid open. My heart stopped. No one got out. It was just open. An invitation. A dark, gaping rectangle. "Leo," I shouted. "Leo, come inside. Now." Leo looked at me, and then he looked at the van, and he smiled and waved. "The shadow man," he giggled, and from the blackness inside the van, a hand came out, a long pale hand, and it waved back. I screamed. I ran out the front door, grabbed Leo by the arm, and dragged him inside, locking the deadbolt. He was crying, asking what was wrong. "The shadow man is my friend," he wailed. I looked out the peephole. The van door was still open. I called 911. "There is a man in a red van, and he is trying to lure my son." I was hysterical. While I was on the phone, I watched as the man from the house, casually walked out of his front door, got into the driver's seat of the van, and drove away. Slowly. The police came. They found nothing. The man was gone. The house was empty. The police went inside the house. It was completely, totally empty. No furniture, no food, no clothes. Just trash. And in the upstairs room, the one where the light was always on, they found a nest, a sleeping bag, and a high-powered telescope pointed directly at my house, at my son's bedroom window. The man, he wasn't living in the house. He was using it as an observation post. The minivan, it was part of it. He was desensitizing my son, waving, becoming the shadow man, becoming his friend, waiting for the 1 second I wasn't looking. The 1 second the door was open. They ran the plates on the van. It was stolen. The man, they had no idea who he was. He'd paid for the house rental 6 months in advance, in cash, using a fake name. We moved to a new state. We don't live in a cul-de-sac anymore. My son is 10 now, and he doesn't remember the shadow man. But I do. I still see that van sometimes, in my nightmares. The side door, sliding open, waiting.